but hopefully you'll learn something, because this is something I think that is critical to every practicing lawyer, and that is securing ourselves from technology and the hackers. So here's some of the things we're going to discuss today. How secure is the transmission of data over the internet? What ethical concerns exist when using the internet for client purposes? What safeguards can you implement in order to not run into problems, ethically or otherwise? And some suggestions for secure usage, examining the ethical rules and opinions from multiple states. And I'm going to start out with that, kind of go through some of the ethical rules so that you'll be able to get a basic understanding of what you are required to do. So I want to start out, there are some of you, and Mike Hawkins, who's not particularly computer literate, uses this method to make sure he's at least 92% secure. And this is something you may want to use, but it does not protect you from over the internet. If you go further and you don't want to use the SOC method, we can use due diligence. And due diligence is required before using technology to store that client data or when you communicate with your client. So if you're sending emails, if you are texting your client, if you have your data in the cloud, when we're going to talk about all these different things, these are issues you need to be concerned about. And this would include not only your desktop computer, but also your laptop or notebook computers. We travel so much nowadays, we take our laptops with us on airplanes, in the car, leaving it in the courtroom. All of these things are issues you need to be aware of, because if your data is taken, you are subjecting yourself to an ethical violation. So, it's not just your laptops, it's also your mobile phones or your iPads and so forth, or even the use of your networks. How many of you are using the Wi-Fi system from the hotel? So, you know this is an open system at this hotel. Anyone who wants to can hack into and attack your computer unless you have safeguards built in. PCs are more subject to being hacked than the Mac computers, but there are ways, and we're going to discuss them here today, on how you can avoid that. All right, so here's what's not cloud computing. Some of you I know are very familiar with cloud computing, but others are not. This is not cloud computing. What is cloud computing is when a lawyer or others store and access data through a remote location not controlled by the lawyer, but by a third party. And that provides a storage and other computing services through the work of networks and remote servers. So the actual cloud, the server that you're storing your data on, may be in a different country. It may be backed up and have one computer in one country, and some of your data is on another computer in another country. So Tennessee came out with this formal public ethics opinion, defining it and discussing the ethical use of technology. It specifically stated that using technology without the proper precautions could result in a violation of the rules of professional conduct. In particular, Rule 1.1, competence of the lawyer, 1.6, confidentiality of information, 1.9, duties to former clients, because if you had data from a client that's an older client, meaning the case has been closed, then you may be violating that as well. And then Rule 5.3, responsibilities for regarding non-lawyer assistance. So let's review these rules just briefly. Competence. The lawyer shall provide competent representation to a client, which requires the legal skill, knowledge, thoroughness, and preparation reasonably necessary for representation. And a lawyer shall not reveal that information unless the client gives informed consent, and the lawyer shall make reasonable efforts to prevent the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of that information relating to the representation of a client. Now, where I practice, it's important for me to get Social Security numbers, and that is a major issue that I have been concerned with, and we've taken extra precautions to try to protect that. So that's just an example of something that you need to be aware of. It's not just your representation. I'm not only concerned about trying to be hacked by the prosecution in certain cases, but also just in general. And we owe a duty to our former client. So if we formerly have represented the client, we cannot reveal that information except as the rules permit or with respect to a certain client with their permission. And then we get to the issue of, well, what about your staff? How many of you have staff that work on your data with you? Yeah, almost everybody. So this is really important because it's obvious in some respects that you have to make sure, first of all, that you have a system set up. So you have an obligation to make reasonable efforts to ensure that your firm has measures giving reasonable assurance that the non-lawyer's conduct is compatible and meets the professional obligations of the lawyer. So the law firm has to have a system in place, and then you as the supervisor have to make sure that you are making reasonable efforts to ensure that your staff, the conduct of your staff is compatible with the professional obligations of the lawyer. Now back to the cloud storage. So because the cloud computing places all this information on a computer over which you have no control, you have to make sure that they, meaning the cloud computing service, is taking efforts to protect that information. And while it increases the mobility, it is a third party now between the information that you've put on there and, of course, your client information. And you need to make sure that that is secure. So it adds a layer of risk and loss of direct control by the lawyer. In Alabama, they came out with a statement in 2010 that concluded that a lawyer may use cloud computing so long as they use reasonable care in doing so. And that's going to be generally what's been established across the United States for ethical rules. And they defined reasonable care as requiring the lawyer to learn how the provider would handle the storage and the security of the data, to reasonably ensure the provider abides by a confidentiality agreement, and to stay abreast of appropriate safeguards. Now think to yourself, have you done that? It is very difficult to do. Most of these cloud computing services don't allow you to do that. North Carolina and Maine suggest that in dealing with providers of cloud computing, lawyers should adopt additional safeguards, such as an agreement between the cloud service provider and the lawyer, stating that the provider will handle confidential client information in keeping with the lawyer's professional responsibilities. And if the lawyer terminates the use of the cloud computing service, the law firm will have a method for retrieving the data. Now, it doesn't say this in this particular opinion, but you have to also ensure that that data gets erased and is not preserved, because all of these cloud companies, cloud service companies, have backups of that data. So how are you going to erase that? And the data needs to be available in a non-proprietary format. So you either have to have that or have access to the vendor's software, like that's going to happen, or their source code. How tough has it been just to get a breath test machine source code, and now we're having to deal with cloud computing. So you need to carefully review the terms of the law firm's user or license agreements, including their security policy, the evaluation of the company's measures for safeguarding the security and the confidentiality of that stored data. Again, that is going to be generally very difficult to do. Pennsylvania, Maine, New Hampshire, and Ohio have listed issues which lawyers should consider, including that the service provider will notify the lawyer if they're requested to produce this data. So if you have a client's data that happens to get subpoenaed by the federal government, what are they going to do with it? You make sure that the provider has procedures to respond to the government or judicial attempts to obtain disclosure of that data, and make sure you are notified. Pennsylvania and Maine list internal policies and procedures that you should adopt, again, such as backing up that data in the event that the firm loses it or that the cloud service loses it, and educating and training employees of the firm to use the cloud computing method. So all of these things come into play, and it gets a lot more complicated than you thought when you were using Dropbox. Because it's not a matter of trust. The lawyer is not required to use infallible methods, but only reasonable precautions. But you've got to make some effort, and you need to document the efforts that you make. So in using that reasonable care, you must also be ready to advise any of the affected parties, any of your clients or others, if you have been hacked, or if the cloud service has been hacked. And we're going to talk about some of the services that have been hacked. There are special circumstances that warrant special precautions, and of course the safeguards just depend on the nature and sensitivity of the data. So, here's some suggested internal procedures. You need to develop a data backup procedure. Now, I personally don't think it's smart to back up your servers or your computers only to the cloud. In fact, I don't back up any of my data to the cloud. The only thing I personally use the cloud services for is when I have to get a video to an expert or a client or limited information. And we're going to talk about how you can do that in a secure manner. Instead, when I back up my data, I have an external hard drive that I use for my server. And then I actually have two of them. And I switch them out once a week. I take one home off-site, and then I switch it out so that I always have a backup that's no more than a week old at home. So if I'm going to lose my server completely by fire or theft or whatever, then I can always restore it straight back from the server at home. You need to educate, take the time to train your employees to make sure they're abiding by your office policy on data security. Create and use strong passwords, and we're going to talk about using passwords later. And you need to separate your business email from your personal email. It's so easy to establish a secondary email, so try not to intertwine the two. So let's talk about the different companies that we can use. How many of you have a Dropbox account? Yeah, almost everybody in here. Nearly 7 million Dropbox passwords have already been hacked. And this is old news at this point. Some suggestions I'm going to make to you today is a company called Jada Cloud. They're out of Norway. And I love Jada Cloud because, let's see, I don't know if you can read this, but the important part is in the last paragraph. We care about privacy in Norway. Privacy stands firm, like the many mountains in Norway. In the United States, on the other hand, privacy rights seem to float like the Mississippi River. So Jada Cloud makes a big deal out of it, and they say they're not going to respond to Patriot Act subpoenas and things of that nature. So in some respects, it's good to have your cloud service out of the United States. Now, my personal preference at the moment, I used to use Jada Cloud. My personal preference at the moment is sync.com, S-Y-N-C. And you can start out with 5 free gigabytes, and then if you refer people, you can end up getting additional storage as well. But one of the reasons I like them is that they are HIPAA compliant. And a lot of medical facilities use Sync when they need a cloud service. So being HIPAA compliant is a good start to make sure your site is secure. The other reason I like Sync is it's easily accessible cross-platform. So if you have an Android phone but you have a Mac computer, it'll work on both. So it works across all of your devices, as does Jada Cloud, frankly. Now, the other thing that I like about Sync, though, is if for some reason I lost my phone and I had Sync on it, I can remote wipe it. It has two-factor authentication. How many of you use two-factor authentication? Only a few of you. For the others who are not familiar with it, what it does is if somebody were to try to access my Sync account, I get a text message or an email, and it gives me a code that I have to put in there in order to actually access it. So if somebody were going to hack my account, not only would they have to hack the account, but they'd also have to have my phone so that they could get the code to put in to actually access it. Now, Sync.com is Canadian, not subject to the US Patriot Act, and they're very proud of that fact. And they have end-to-end encryption. So before it leaves my computer, it gets encrypted. It goes through a secure socket layer, so over the internet it's encrypted, and then once on their machines, it is encrypted again. So I've explained to you what end-to-end encryption is. Other services, data is not always encrypted at all three stages. Just in case you're wondering, the pricing here, 5 gigabytes, which is more than enough for most people's personal use, unless you've got tons and tons of pictures, is free. The 500 gigabytes is about $50 a year, but you can get 2 terabytes for about $100. And there are links that you can use to get extra storage. It's in your written materials, which have been provided to you. So go ahead and use that. If you get an extra gig if you use the link that I have provided to you in your written materials. But if we look at the $100, and just to see what it gets us, I've explained to you, you get 2 terabytes of storage per year. Terabytes are a huge amount of data. Java Cloud, you can get 10 gigabytes free for 2 users, and then Dropbox, 2 terabytes of storage for 8 months for 3 users. So that gives you some general idea. I've never had to use a paid service. I have plenty of storage just using the regular free plans for the purposes that I need. Now, in addition to all this, we have cloud-based case management. So the cloud-based case management includes perhaps your client's database, case tracking, project management, document storage, calendars, time tracking, all these things, and they're online, and there's a lot of different companies that have it. They make me very nervous. So Clio is one of these, goclio.com, C-L-I-O. Another is Rocket Matter. And these companies claim to be able to manage your entire client database. Anything you need from wherever you want, and feel free just to go in and handle your cases regardless of your location. But again, my concern is that they can be hacked. These are cross-platform. Cross-platform means they'll work Mac computers, PC computers, whatever system you happen to have. And so it makes it possible to be a web-based virtual law office. This is easy, but not necessarily ethical, because all of the information relating to your clients is stored in a single web-based system. And if your account is compromised, you're going to be in violation of your ethical rules, among the other problems you're going to have. So all the concerns we've talked about with cloud computing have now been magnified. So here's a suggestion to you. First of all, when I sign up a client, I obtain a written authorization to, first of all, be able to communicate with them by email or text. And I have them acknowledge that I can't guarantee confidentiality. Because it used to be I would rarely get an email. And when my client comes in, I tell them, do not email me details about your case. If you'd like an appointment with me, send me an email. If you feel more comfortable doing that, I'll call you, we'll schedule an appointment. But do not send the details of your case, because it's not confidential. And I explained that to them. There's also the issue if I were to respond or send them an email, and their employer sees it, or their spouse or children see it. And now they know, well, they've been involved in a criminal case, they've been arrested, and previously it had not been made known to this third party. So those are the issues that are there, and I make sure they write in their handwriting which email address they want me to send things to. While I'm at it, I have a whole separate section for cloud storage content. So the first one here, this is exactly what I use. I'm not going to read the entire thing to you. It is in your written materials. But it states, as you can see near the end there, accordingly, I understand the electronic communications are not absolutely confidential. Nonetheless, I hereby give my consent to receive communications to the following. And the following are the email addresses and the cell phone numbers, and I make them date and sign that. Then I talk about the cloud storage consent. Further, I agree so long as my attorneys exercise reasonable care in selecting a secured cloud-based storage service. I have no objection to certain information pertaining to my case being temporarily stored on a remote server. So I have them sign that because I want them to be aware of what's going on with their data. Again, this is in your written materials. Now, as we travel about, as many of you have while you've been here at this seminar, we are increasingly relying on our mobile devices, which is great. It provides us with availability and access, but we also have additional ethical considerations. How many of you are aware that unless you turn it off, the Android phones and the iOS, the Apple iPhone, allow somebody to go into your phone and see where you've been and how long you stayed there? About half of you. So it's very important that you be aware of this. And frankly, it's been great on some cases where my clients say, I wasn't even there, or I wasn't there for that long. And I've been able to access the information, take a screenshot off their phone, and be able to present that to the prosecutor. So it's a double-edged sword, and Google Maps, if you use Google Maps, even offers a timeline feature that maps everywhere you travel, even if you're walking. So on the Apple phone system, if you're interested in turning yours off or on, you can just go to Settings, and you can see what I have on the screen for you, how to get there, selecting Privacy, then Location Services, and so forth. It's not easy to find. Again, all of this is in your written materials. Once you get there, it shows exactly where you've been by map, the dates you were there, and the times you spent there. Now, on Android or Google, depending on your device, you can go to Locations, Location History, and take a look at it there, and then you can turn off location tracking for that particular device or for other Google services as well. Now let me tell you something that I've seen a lot of lawyers do that I think is just ridiculous, and that is they take their actual signature and they go ahead and put it in an email. And in that email, they have a facsimile of their signature. Do not do that, folks. You can copy that signature as an image and put it on any document that one would want. And it's your signature. So if you want to have something fancy, or use it in a different font, use a different color, because you don't want to take the risk of having someone forge your signature. Now let's take a few moments and talk about getting hacked. The FBI director of the United States has said China has hacked every big U.S. company. Let's review some of them. Sony, Home Depot, Dairy Queen, Target, Nationwide, eBay, and Yahoo. In 2013, the first time it was hacked, at least as far as we know, Yahoo hit the worst hack ever. 500 million accounts were swiped. In December 2016, they updated it, and they said 1 billion user accounts were hacked. Later, they updated that, and they said there's been a second separate attack. And in the separate second attack, what's important there is they went through with all the different security issues on what had been stolen, including bank account information. Then in October 2017, they came out with another update and said, well, there wasn't 1 billion, It was 3 billion Yahoo accounts that were affected by the 2013 attack. Now, last month, Equifax came out and said a cyber attack may have affected 143 million. They stated that other cyber attacks, including 2 breaches that Yahoo announced, eclipsed the penetration at Equifax. However, thieves were able to siphon more personal information, the keys that unlock consumers' medical histories, bank accounts, and employee records. How many of you have taken measures to contact not 3, but 4 of the credit agencies in the United States to freeze your accounts? Folks, you need to consider doing that. It's a bit time-consuming, I will tell you, but that's something you want to consider, because I've represented somebody whose identity was stolen. It ended up costing him, I ended up having to hire a retired FBI agent, and this was years ago, ended up costing him close to $25,000. And the person who stole his account was from a different state. The age difference was 25 by the thief versus 70 by my client, and of a complete opposite race. So the actual facts are very difficult to prove and apparently of no relevance once you get on the computer. So let's take a minute and talk about passwords. A password is like a toothbrush. You have to choose a good one, don't share it with anyone, and you need to change it occasionally. Now, if you're like me, you've got hundreds of passwords. Every few years, I go through and change the manner in which I create and save the passwords, and I go through and change them. You need to create a unique password for every important account that you have. You need to use numbers, symbols, mix up the case, mix up the numbers and the symbols that you use. Now, they used to say a 7-character password was sufficient. But because of developments in the way that they hack now, they recommend currently a 12-character password with numbers, symbols, and mixed case letters, because that has 30,000 times as many possible combinations than an 8-character password with only lowercase letters. Do not use the same password on multiple sites. People come up with one password and they're going to use it on everything because it's easy to remember. Do not do that. Change it around, because if they uncover one password, they're going to try it on all your other websites. Remember that a reused password is only as secure as the least secure service where it was used. So if you happen to have the same password on Yahoo as your bank account, and they hack into Yahoo, they see that you've been visiting your bank account, they're in. Do not use personal information or common words as your password. Google suggests using a random word or phrase and try to make it extra difficult to guess. So as you see on the screens here, we've got spooky. One of the O's is a 0, an E is a 3. We're using an @ symbol instead of an A, things like that. Now, it's difficult to remember, so I'm going to help you get through all that as well. But you don't want to use, and it's amazing to me, people use words or phrases like password for their password, or let me in. Keyboard patterns like the QWERTY, just following the keys, or the QAZ, WSX, those are not good passwords, even though they're not words. Do not use ABCD 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, these are the first things that a hacker is going to try to use. And make sure, again, that it's at least 12 characters long. I kind of like this cartoon that says, my password is again. Whenever I forget my password, the computer says, try again. So some of the experts say, try to consider using a sentence that's easy to remember, like I love sushi and then some numbers, the year you were born or something. Again, using different characters instead of actual letters. I hate exercise. My wife, who you may have met at the registration desk, make me put this in here. My wife is great. So something like that is more helpful, but again, you need to make sure it is long enough. Other experts say use the first letter of each word in a sentence that you'll remember. So the Shakespearean phrase, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks," becomes this. So if you have a favorite quote, a favorite lyric in a song, you can use the first letters of that, first numbers. How many of you have ever heard of correct horse battery staple? I hadn't either until I did some research on this. So this is a URL that you can type in your browser. And on that, it is a free password generator to help keep you safer. And what the whole concept is very different. So this is what the password generator looks like, as you can see on your screen. And you can change the length, separators, and so forth, and then it will generate a password. And the whole concept behind this is, instead of using, as you can see on your screen, what's supposed to be Troubadour and 3, which has 28 bits of entropy, meaning how random this particular word, so to speak, is. Then you start getting confused, so easy to come up with, but difficult to remember. They suggest 4 random common words, which is 44 bits of entropy. So if we use the easy one, it takes about 3 days to guess it. If you use the more difficult one, 550 years at 1,000 guesses per second. So much more difficult. So they're recommending you come up with a phrase that doesn't make sense, basically. So how can we create passwords like this? You can use an online generator such as that, and there are several on there. But on a Mac computer, for those of you using Macs, you can use the instructions at this link, also in your written materials. And the Mac has a built-in password generator. You see the screen like this. It's called Password Assistant, and you can use at the top there it says memorable, so you can make it a memorable one. That particular one's not particularly memorable for me, but it may be for you. You can adjust the quality and length and so forth, and of course it gives you hints. If you use Windows, you can use the link at ilovefreesoftware.com, and then it goes through a password generator software, also in your written materials. I particularly prefer the two-step verification. I think your most important passwords need to be using this two-step verification, and we've discussed that already. How many of you use Word? I used to use WordPerfect. Everybody here almost uses Word. So when you send this out, particularly if you use a Word document where you're sending special damages in a personal injury case, or you're sending sensitive information in a DUI case, and you send it in a Word format, you need to be aware that the metadata in that document allows someone who knows what they're doing to go back and look at the corrections you made and other information on that document you may not want them to see. It would also allow them to look to see who created it, the time the document was composed or edited. So how do you get around that problem? You need to send it in a PDF format. So there's 2 ways to do that. Let me see if I can show you real easily here how to do that. If we go, I happen to use the Mac computer. So if we take this Word document, there's 2 ways to do it. We can go to File, and this is going to be the same even if you're using a PC. And we're going to Save As. And then under Format, I'm simply going to change that to PDF. So pretty easy to do, and we click that and then save. The other way to do it is you can just go to File, Print. Now, you can save a step here. Well, the resolution on here is going to make it difficult, but down at the bottom where it says print, you can either save as a PDF or you can mail it as a PDF. And you can do that right off your browser as well. So be aware that there are different ways you can do that, and I strongly suggest that when you send a document to opposing counsel, that you do that using a PDF. The other advantage is if you have any issues with their particular printer, it may print very differently. The formatting may be different depending on how they print it and their particular computer system, if you leave it in the original Word format. When you change it to the PDF, then it will be exactly like you sent it. Now, there's another way to help you with these passwords, and a lot of people are using a password manager. So what is a password manager? The password manager securely keeps track of all your passwords. It creates unique passwords, very difficult to remember, but you don't have to remember them because it's going to create the special password for you and it will remember it. So the Mac system, the OS X, will use it with applications such as a Safari browser or Firefox browser, which is what I recommend. But you can also use something called KeePass X, which is my desktop application for passwords. And then I use an application called Mini KeePass on my phone, so I can always keep it synced up by using a cloud service. So I can put it in the cloud, this particular application, and if I want to look it up on my phone or make changes on my phone, I can. It will also change it on my desktop application at home next time I open it up. But there are other much easier applications to use. LastPass, for instance, which several people in my office use, is a free download. It's based in the cloud and it syncs across all your devices. Now you can pay for it. I don't know that there's any need to pay for it. It tells you that you won't receive ads, but the people that have been using it actually don't receive ads. So right now I don't think that's going to be a major factor, and it may be something you want to try. And there's another one called Dashlane, which is a free download, and it will sync all of your devices for $40 per year. So those are very easy to use and something you may want to strongly consider. They are highly recommended, supposedly secure. And one of the big questions I had when using either FastPass or Dashlane was my concern that if they break in and they hack my particular account, how is that helpful? Because now they have access to all of my passwords. Well, your passwords aren't necessarily stored in the cloud. It's just the application that communicates with your particular device. So if you're using a desktop computer, it would communicate there. All of your passwords are only saved on your local device, that is your desktop computer or your phone, something like that. So that's something that you, again, may want to strongly consider. Personally, I feel comfortable using the KeePass, and I'll show you what that looks like right here. But let's talk a little bit more about LastPass first. So it has, according to them, very strong encryption algorithms. It's only local encryption, and it has two-factor authentication. So if somebody's trying to hack in, you're going to get that notice with the two-factor. Then we have the $24 a year premium upgrade. Dashlane says they're always secure. They have the strongest encryption available to protect your passwords, and it's always private because your master password that you need to get into everything is not known by them in any form or fashion, only by you. Now, I've promised you I'd let you see what KeePass looks like. It's very rudimentary. It's an open source software application. And so that open source means that it's available to a lot of different programmers, and then it has to be approved. Whereas Microsoft, for instance, which does not allow open source, applications. They could be subpoenaed. They always have a back door to get in, or at least usually. Yes, sir, did you have a question?
If Dashlane doesn't have your password, how do you get in? You have to have something for you to get in.
So the question is, if Dashlane doesn't have your password, how do you get in? Well, your master password is on your computer. It's not kept in the cloud. If you forget your master password, you're screwed. So that is a problem. So back to KeePass here, you can see what it says. I can put different things in groups with a username, my URL, my password, things like that, and then I can even put comments in there. And so it's an entirely separate application. I can use complex passwords to access all of these electronic devices, and you need to make sure that your devices are locked. So here's the other problem I see with Dashlane and FastPass. If it's on a computer at work and you leave that computer, someone else sits down at your computer, all those passwords are saved so they can go to your browser and get into your bank account or whatever else there is, because they automatically go in. Does that make sense to you? So you have to make sure that your computer is secure. Because if you leave it unlocked, someone else can go in there and do whatever they want with your computer. So with a Mac computer, for instance, you can get this. It's going again with the there'll be a little lock at the top, so you can actually lock your computer, and it just locks the screen. So if you go in and lock your screen and you have your secure password on there, then no one else can get in to see your computer, and that would solve the problem. If you close out your browser, such as Firefox or Safari or whatever you use on the Microsoft products, once you go in there, it will send an alert to you with a code because you have that two-factor authentication. Okay, let's talk about self-encrypting your disk. Let's suppose somebody gets to your computer and they pull your disk out and they put it in their computer, and they can then hack into that. Something I recommend is using self-encryption, and it's not difficult. On a Mac computer, there's a program called File Vault. On a PC computer, you can use BitLocker. And so what it does is, when I start up my computer, and I'd show you, except you won't be able to see it on the screen, when I start up my computer, then I have to enter a password to unencrypt all the data to even get it to start up. If you use a startup self-encryption program, then you're going to be able to avoid anyone getting into your computer, period, without your password. When you're on the internet, let me just mention a few things to you here. There's a great download that you can put onto your browser called Privacy Badger. Privacy Badger has been established by a group of computer experts who are trying to stop all this tracking of your information across multiple websites. So it's an add-on that stops advertisers and other trackers from secretly tracking you to see what you're looking at on the web, allegedly so they can start sending you advertisements for their particular products. So just go into your browser and type in Privacy Badger, B-A-D-G-E-R. Okay. When you choose that search engine, so that we have browsers and search engines, of course, we have many choices. Google tracks the heck out of you. They want to know what you're searching for, and they try to say, well, we're doing this so we can recommend to you better websites. And their trackers have been found on 75% of the top 1,000,000 websites. Now, once this information is tracked and stored, it can be subpoenaed like anything else. So I don't use Google unless I have to. There are times when I do that. And the little privacy, you can have private searching functions on it. That's not for that purpose. They can still find out what it is you were searching for. So I use Firefox, which is my browser, and then my search engine I use is called DuckDuckGo. Now, it's a funny name, but they take the privacy very seriously. They assure you they won't store your personal information, they don't follow you around with ads, and they don't track you. So it's a search engine that you may want to consider using. Even safer, we talked about the Wi-Fi system here. When I use Wi-Fi in a hotel or anywhere else that I'm not at home, I use a virtual private network. It's a VPN, and it connects to my office. It looks like, to an outside user, that I am searching from my office. So not only can I access my client data through this VPN, it also looks like all the searching is going on from my office. So it effectively provides a tunnel from either my phone, which I can use a VPN on my phone, or my computer, and it blocks anyone else from hacking into it or peeping in. So you need to talk to your particular internet technology expert and see what you can do to establish this VPN. When you can also not only establish your own private VPN, but you can use a VPN from the internet. And if you use that, it will provide you with privacy, but you need to make sure they're not collecting or sharing your personal information. You need to look at the cost, because the free services are not as private as the ones you pay for. So it may be less expensive for you to use a paid service than to pay for your IT expert to set up your own VPN. But you also need to consider speed, because it can slow your searches down. You need to consider your location. As long as you're in the U.S., I haven't experienced any issues in the U.S., and frankly have experienced very few issues out of the country, although there are connection issues when you're cruising on a ship or a river cruise or a boat. So with that in mind, I will tell you that implementing these suggestions should keep you and your law firm out of the hot water of technology. Don't be afraid, but as our President Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. So hopefully you've learned something and you can take this home and try to practice a little safer technology and stay within your ethical bounds. Are there any questions? Great. Yes, sir. I will, the question is, he didn't see my materials in there. If you look on the Saturday workshop, the materials will be there because I switched from Saturday to Friday. If you don't see it, let me know. I'll help you find it. Yes, sir. So the question is there any way to text without divulging your personal phone number? Or is there a way to call, for instance, without divulging your personal phone number? Texting is easy. There's a lot of applications depending on which phone you're using, so that you can text through a different application and it will not reveal your phone number. Phone calling, I will tell you, I've recently downloaded Google Voice. And Google Voice will allow you to call using another number. So you can select from probably 5 to 7 different phone numbers in your area, or if you're from Knoxville, Tennessee, and you want your phone number to be from San Diego, California, you can make it look like that. And you can call from that number. So it's not particularly complicated. It takes about probably 20 to 30 minutes to set up to where you would feel comfortable with it. But I've started using that when I had tried, when clients call in and I want to return their call, I used to block my number from them. And then the response is, this phone system does not accept blocked numbers. So I'm using Google Voice now. It's just going to come up with a different number, and I can later block it from Google Voice or change my phone number later. So that's another good system to use. Will it keep any kind of records? So in response to your question of whether it keeps records, Google Voice will keep a record of who you called and how long you were on the phone, but it will not record your conversations, although there is an option where you can record your conversations. So the question is there any way to keep a record of your text messages so that you can document later on what conversation occurred? And the answer is yes. You can either take a screenshot of that and email it to yourself, or you can take each separate comment, so there may be comments in there that you don't want to save, and then you could email those to yourself and it'll be just like an email. The question is, am I familiar with any agreement with the cloud service to delete the data once the service has been terminated? And the answer is no. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, I just am not aware of it. All right, well, thank you very much. I hope you all learned something today.